Aisha Hayes stood at the rain-streaked window of her cramped Atlanta apartment, watching gray clouds merge with the horizon. The relentless downpour hammered against the glass, drops racing downward in chaotic streams, much like her life had spiraled into disorder over these past brutal months. "Aisha? You still there?" A frail voice drifted from the adjacent room. The 23-year-old woman exhaled slowly, tucking a rebellious strand of dark hair behind her ear. She'd mastered the art of concealing her emotions behind a practiced smile years ago, but today, even that familiar armor threatened to shatter. "Yes, Mom. I'm coming," she called back, injecting false cheer into her tone. Her mother's bedroom reeked of antiseptic and stagnant air. Lena Hayes lay propped against pillows, her once vibrant face now gaunt and hollow, eyes clouded with relentless pain and bone-deep exhaustion. The illness had been devouring her from within for nearly a year, and the family's empty bank account meant proper treatment remained a distant fantasy. "I brought you some tea." Aisha set the steaming cup on the cluttered nightstand and perched carefully on the bed's edge. "How are you feeling today?" "Don't ask." Her mother attempted a smile that twisted into something closer to a grimace. "Where's your father?" "Dad went to meet with those people again." Lena closed her eyes, a single tear carving a path down her hollowed cheek. "Dear God, how did we sink this low? I begged Marcus not to borrow money from them. I pleaded with him." Aisha squeezed her mother's papery hand, remembering that fateful day 3 months earlier when her father had burst through the door clutching a thick wad of cash, money for her mother's desperately needed surgery, which they couldn't possibly afford through legitimate means. It had seemed like divine intervention then, a miraculous salvation. But loan sharks weren't known for their mercy or forgiveness. The apartment door exploded inward with a violent crash, jolting both women. Marcus Hayes stumbled into the bedroom, and Aisha knew instantly from his ashen complexion and trembling hands that the conversation had gone catastrophically wrong. "Dad, what did they say?" Her voice came out smaller than intended. The man collapsed onto a rickety chair, burying his face in his weathered hands. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the ancient clock's mechanical ticking. "We have 1 week," he finally managed, his voice scraped raw. 7 days to repay the entire debt. Otherwise, Aisha whispered, though her racing heart already knew the answer would be devastating. "They'll seize the apartment." He paused, struggling with what came next. "But that's not even the worst part. What else could there possibly be?" "They said there's an alternative." Marcus finally lifted his eyes to meet his daughter's, and the shame and anguish she saw there made her stomach drop. "Their boss is an extremely wealthy man. He noticed you once when he came here to collect payment. He's willing to forgive the entire debt completely, if you agree to become his wife." The ground seemed to dissolve beneath Aisha's feet. She heard the words, but her brain refused to process their meaning, rejected the reality they represented. "Are you serious right now?" The words came out choked, strangled. "Dad, please tell me this is some kind of sick joke." "I would never." Marcus's voice cracked completely. "Aisha, sweetheart, I would never ask this of you under normal circumstances. But they made it crystal clear, if we don't pay, they won't just take the apartment. They promised your mother wouldn't survive to see the month's end. They threatened her life directly." Lena gasped sharply. Aisha felt herself turn to stone, paralyzed as fragments of terrifying thoughts flickered through her mind like a broken film reel. "Who is he?" she heard herself ask with eerie calm. "This man. His name is Elias Thorne. He's approaching 60 years old. According to them, he barely walks anymore after suffering a severe stroke. But he's extraordinarily wealthy and influential in ways we can't begin to comprehend." Her father spoke without raising his eyes from the floor. "We don't have any other choice, sweetheart. We're completely out of options." The following days dissolved into a suffocating fog. Aisha moved mechanically through her daily routines, caring for her mother, preparing meals, cleaning, but internally, a violent storm of conflicting emotions raged. Fury at her father's reckless foolishness, overwhelming pity for her mother's suffering, terror of an unknowable future, and worst of all, a corrosive guilt because deep down, she blamed her parents for trapping her in this nightmare. On the third day, a representative from Elias Thorne arrived. He was tall and well-built, approximately 40 years old, impeccably dressed in an expensive tailored suit. He looked so jarringly out of place in their dreary, cramped apartment that Aisha almost laughed. Almost. "My name is Darius Powell," he introduced himself smoothly, extending an embossed business card. "I'm Mr. Thorne's personal assistant. He asked me to deliver this to you personally." Aisha accepted the heavy envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a glossy photograph of a mansion that resembled a palatial estate, and a brief handwritten note, "This will be your home. I promise you will want for nothing." "Mr. Thorne is a man of his word," Darius continued, carefully observing her reaction. "He understands the situation is highly unusual, but he's prepared to provide for not just you, but your parents as well. Your mother will receive treatment from the best specialists in the country, even abroad if necessary." "And what does he get in return?" Aisha's voice came out colder than she expected. "I need to know the complete truth. What does he really want from me?" Darius Powell hesitated momentarily, carefully selecting his words. Elias Thorne is nearing 60. He suffered a devastating stroke that left him gravely ill. The entire left side of his body is barely functional. He walks with extreme difficulty, relying heavily on a cane and constant nursing assistance. The doctors have given him perhaps 1 year, possibly 2 at most. He has no heirs, no remaining family. He's utterly alone. The man paused significantly. He wants to spend whatever time remains to him not in crushing solitude. He needs companionship, a wife who will remain by his side until the end. "So I'm supposed to be his nurse?" Bitterness broke through Aisha's carefully controlled voice. "A glorified caretaker?" "A wife," Darius corrected firmly. "A legal, lawful wife. After his death, you will inherit his entire estate. It's a substantial fortune, Miss Hayes. Believe me when I say your family will be financially secure for generations." Aisha looked toward her mother lying in the next room, who had overheard every devastating word. Their eyes met across the distance, and in Lena's gaze, Aisha saw both a desperate plea and a readiness to sacrifice everything, even her own life, rather than watch her daughter sell herself this way. "I have conditions," Aisha announced, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I'm listening." "My mother's treatment begins immediately. Today, not tomorrow. My father's debt is completely nullified right now, documented and official. And I want to meet him before any wedding takes place. I want to see this man face to face. Mr. Thorne prefers not to reveal himself before the wedding ceremony," Darius began diplomatically, but Aisha cut him off sharply. "Those are my non-negotiable conditions. Either I see him beforehand, or there's no deal whatsoever. Your choice." The assistant pulled out his phone and moved toward the window, speaking quietly to someone. Aisha caught fragments of phrases. "She insists." "I understand." "Yes, sir." "Okay, I'll inform her." Finally, he returned. "Mr. Thorne agrees to your terms. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a car will arrive to transport you to the estate." He handed her another envelope, this one noticeably thick. "This is an advance payment for your mother's treatment. You'll receive the remainder after the marriage is legally registered." After Darius departed, Aisha opened the envelope. Inside was more money than she had encountered in her entire life. Her father, peering over her shoulder, turned visibly pale. "God, Aisha, maybe we shouldn't go through with this. We'll find another way somehow. We have to." "No, Dad," the girl said with unexpected firmness. "We won't find another way because there isn't one. We've completely run out of options. Tomorrow, I'll go look at this man, and then I'll make my final decision. Sleep eluded Aisha that night. She lay staring at the ceiling, contemplating how devastatingly quickly life could transform. Just 1 month ago, she was an ordinary young woman with ordinary dreams, finding meaningful employment, meeting someone kind, building a family. Now she was preparing to sell herself to save her parents' lives. A sleek black sedan arrived precisely at 3 o'clock. Aisha wore her best dress, a simple dark burgundy one she'd been saving for special occasions. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. She was dressing up to meet the man who had essentially purchased her. Her mother wept as she watched her daughter leave, while her father stood apart, unable to meet her eyes. Aisha embraced Lena tightly and whispered, "It's going to be okay, Mom. I promise." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The drive to the estate consumed about an hour. The vehicle departed the city limits, winding along narrow country roads bordered by sprawling fields and dense groves, until it turned through towering gates adorned with elaborate gilded flourishes. Beyond the gates, the grounds opened into something more resembling an immaculate park than a residential yard, perfectly manicured lawns, decorative fountains, and avenues lined with ancient trees. At the center of this breathtaking splendor stood the mansion itself, a magnificent 3-story structure with classical columns and elegant balconies that stole her breath away. Darius Powell met her at the grand entrance. "Welcome," he said with an enigmatic smile. "Mr. Thorne is waiting for you in the library. Please follow me." Inside, the mansion proved even more impressive. Gleaming marble floors, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light, oil paintings in gilded frames lining the walls. Aisha felt as though she'd stepped into a living museum. Their footsteps echoed through the spacious corridors. The library occupied the entire second floor. Darius opened the massive oak doors and stepped aside, allowing Aisha to enter first. The room was enormous, with walls lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes. Near the window sat a man with his back to the door, silhouetted against the afternoon light, broad shoulders, gray hair. "Mr. Thorne, your guest has arrived," the assistant announced before departing, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Heavy, oppressive silence descended. The man didn't turn, and Aisha didn't know whether to approach or wait. Finally, she took several hesitant steps forward. "Hello." Her voice emerged quieter than intended. "Come closer." A deep, commanding voice filled the space. "I want to see you properly." Aisha slowly circled the chair and stopped. Before her sat a man whose face was concealed by a strange half-mask covering the upper portion of his face and one eye. Only his chin, covered in gray stubble, and thin lips were visible. His left arm lay completely lifelessly on the armrest, while his right hand rested on an ornate cane. "Don't be frightened," he said with a bitter smirk, noticing her reaction. "The stroke spared neither body nor face. The left side is entirely paralyzed. The face is distorted beyond recognition. An unpleasant sight, I agree. That's precisely why I wear this mask." Aisha swallowed hard. His voice was strong and resonant, completely inconsistent with the image of a frail, dying patient. "Sit," he gestured toward a chair opposite him. "I imagine you have numerous questions." "Why me?" Aisha blurted out as she sat down carefully. "You have enormous wealth. You could hire any companion, purchase any company you desire. Why force me into marrying you?" Elias Thorne remained silent for several long seconds, as if carefully weighing his response. "Because you won't come to me out of greed," he finally said. "You aren't here because you covet my money for yourself. You're here for your family. That speaks volumes about your character, your fundamental nature." He paused meaningfully. "My entire life I've been surrounded by people who wanted something from me. Money, connections, influence, power. Not a single person who was with me simply to be with me, for who I am rather than what I possess. And you think I'll be with you just to be with you? Aisha couldn't restrain herself. You said it yourself. I'm here for my family. How is that different? Yes, but at least you're honest about your motives, he replied. And I know with certainty you won't betray me. Your demonstrated loyalty to your family is a guarantee that you'll fulfill your part of our arrangement. What part exactly? Aisha pressed. What do you truly want from me? Elias Thorne struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. He was indeed barely able to stand. His left leg dragged across the floor with each labored step. Just be near me, he said with profound weariness. Dine with me. Engage in conversation. Read books aloud to me. Create the illusion that I have a family, that I'm not dying completely alone in this empty house. He turned toward the window. That's all I'm asking. Aisha studied the stooped figure silhouetted against the window and felt a strange mixture of pity and revulsion churning within her. Pity because he was clearly a dying, desperately lonely man. Revulsion because he was using his immense wealth to purchase company without considering what she wanted, what she was sacrificing. And if I refuse? She asked softly. If I stand up right now and walk out that door? Elias Thorne turned, and his single visible eye flashed with something resembling surprise. Then the money I provided for your mother's treatment will have to be returned immediately, and your father's debt will remain in full force. I won't hold you here by force, Aisha. The choice has always been yours to make. She stood and approached the window, positioning herself beside him. From this vantage point, there was a beautiful view of the garden bathed in pre-sunset golden light. Somewhere beyond those high walls was her old life, the cramped apartment, the dying mother, the guilt-ridden father, crushing poverty and absolute hopelessness. When is the wedding scheduled? She asked without taking her eyes from the window. In 1 week. A quiet ceremony, only the bare legal necessities. No celebration unless you object to that arrangement. I don't object. Aisha turned to face him directly. I have one additional condition. I'm listening. I want to continue visiting my parents regularly, and I want them to be able to visit here whenever my mother feels well enough to travel. Elias Thorne nodded slowly. Of course. This is your home now. You can invite anyone you wish whenever you choose. He took several labored steps toward the door, each movement clearly requiring tremendous effort. Darius will show you the available rooms. You can select any one you prefer, except mine. Your personal belongings will be transported here tomorrow. Wait. Aisha stopped him. I haven't given my final yes yet. The man turned, and his lips curved into the semblance of a smile. But you've already made your decision. I can see it clearly in your eyes. He opened the door. Welcome to the golden cage, Aisha. When the door closed behind him, the girl sank back into the chair and covered her face with her hands. There were no tears. She had seemingly cried them all out over the past brutal days. Only emptiness and bone-deep exhaustion remained. Darius Powell reappeared approximately 10 minutes later and led her on a comprehensive tour through the mansion. There were so many rooms that Aisha quickly lost count. Multiple living rooms, formal dining rooms, a billiard room, a fully equipped gym, an elaborate winter garden. The bedrooms occupied the entire 3rd floor, each one a suite of rooms with soaring ceilings and enormous windows. This entire section of the estate is at your complete disposal, the assistant explained. Mr. Thorne occupies rooms on the ground floor. The stairs are too difficult for him to manage regularly. You may choose any bedroom that appeals to you. Aisha stopped outside a room in the corner of the building. The windows offered sweeping views of the garden on one side and dense woods on the other. The room was bright and spacious, furnished substantially but not ostentatiously. This one, she decided. An excellent choice, Darius approved, then stumbled slightly over his words. Someone used to live here, actually. Never mind. Tomorrow I'll arrange for your personal belongings to be brought here. And now, allow me to escort you to dinner. Mr. Thorne expects you in the small dining room at 7 o'clock. Left alone, Aisha walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Below, a gardener was methodically clipping hedges, a peaceful, ordinary scene. But inside Aisha, everything was churning violently. She remembered Elias Thorne's words about the golden cage. How devastatingly accurate he had been. Everything was here: wealth, comfort, security, safety, everything except freedom. At 7 o'clock that evening, she descended to the small dining room. The small room was approximately the size of their entire apartment. A long mahogany table was set for 2 people at opposite ends. Elias Thorne was already seated in his place, the mask still concealing his face. "Please sit," he gestured to the seat opposite. Dinner passed in oppressive silence. Aisha barely touched her food, though the dishes were exquisitely prepared. Elias Thorne ate slowly and awkwardly, struggling to handle his fork with only his right hand. "Tell me about yourself," he finally said. "What did you do for work? What brings you joy?" "I worked at the public library," Aisha replied curtly. "I love to read." "What kind of books?" "Classics, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy. I read contemporary fiction as well." "We have an extensive library here," he noted. "You're welcome to take any book that interests you." "I love to read too, but my eyesight is failing rapidly now. It would be pleasant if you would consider reading to me aloud sometimes." Aisha nodded without meeting his eyes. After dinner, Aisha returned to her room and stood at the window for a long time, staring into the darkness. The stars in the sky seemed distant and cold, much like her new life stretching before her. She tried to imagine living here permanently, accepting that this was truly her home, but the thought wouldn't settle in her mind, wouldn't feel real. In the morning, she was awakened by a knock on the door. A woman in her 50s, wearing a strict gray dress, stood at the threshold. "Good morning," she said with a slight Eastern European accent. "My name is Esther. I am the housekeeper. Mr. Thorne asked me to inform you that breakfast is served at 8. Your belongings have been delivered. I've arranged for them to be placed in the dressing room." Aisha walked into the adjacent dressing room and stopped at the threshold, stunned. Her modest suitcase of clothes was completely lost among rows of new dresses, tailored suits, and designer shoes. Everything was expensive and high quality, clearly selected to perfectly fit her size. "Where did all this come from?" she asked, bewildered. "Mr. Thorne arranged everything," Esther shrugged matter-of-factly. "He said a wife should look the part. If anything doesn't fit properly, inform me, and we'll exchange it immediately." Aisha ran her hand over a silk dress, feeling the luxurious fabric. She could only have dreamed of such things before. Now she had an entire wardrobe full of designer clothing, but it brought her absolutely no joy. Every dress was a stark reminder of the price she had paid. The following days blurred into a monotonous routine. Breakfasts and dinners with Elias Thorne, conducted with polite but strained conversation. Long hours in the library where she read aloud to him. Solitary walks through the expansive garden. Elias Thorne never insisted on her constant presence. He gave her freedom of movement and time. But that freedom felt illusory. She was still trapped in a cage, even if it was gilded and beautiful. She was genuinely surprised that Elias never once attempted to get physically close to her. He maintained careful distance, always polite and proper. Sometimes she caught his gaze, the single eye visible from behind the mask, looking at her with a kind of profound melancholy, but he would immediately look away when noticed. On the 4th evening, while Aisha was reading him a story by Chekhov, he suddenly interrupted her. "Are you unhappy here?" It wasn't really a question. Aisha closed the book and looked at him directly. "What did you expect? That I'd be ecstatic about this arrangement?" "No," he sighed heavily. But I hoped that in time you would at least grow accustomed to life in captivity, find some measure of peace. To selling myself? Bitterness broke through her voice. Is that what you expected me to adjust to? You saved your family, he countered. It's not a sale. It's a sacrifice. There's a fundamental difference. There's very little difference from where I'm standing. Aisha stood abruptly. May I go? I'm tired. Elias Thorne nodded, and she headed for the door. But his voice stopped her at the threshold. Aisha, I know what you think of me, and perhaps you're entirely right. But believe me, if I had had any other way, any other option. He fell silent, unable to finish. Good night, she said without replying, and left. In the corridor, she encountered Darius Powell unexpectedly. How is he feeling? The assistant asked with apparent concern. Tired, Aisha answered curtly, trying to pass him. But he detained her with a question. Do you know why he wears the mask constantly, at all times? He said his face is paralyzed after the stroke. Darius looked at her strangely, an odd expression crossing his features. Yes, of course. That's the only reason. He nodded and departed, leaving Aisha perplexed. What had he meant by that cryptic statement? The wedding took place exactly 1 week later, precisely as Elias Thorne had promised. A small, perfunctory ceremony at the county clerk's office without guests or celebration. Only the two of them, Darius Powell serving as witness, and an elderly woman Aisha hadn't seen before. Elias Thorne arrived in a formal black suit, leaning heavily on his cane. The mask still concealed half of his face. Aisha wore a simple white dress, one of the new additions to her wardrobe. She couldn't bring herself to look in the mirror before leaving her room. The ceremony was brief and joyless. When the clerk pronounced them husband and wife, Elias Thorne didn't attempt to kiss the bride. He simply took her hand in his. His palm was surprisingly warm and dry. Thank you, he whispered. Aisha didn't answer. A painful lump in her throat prevented her from uttering a single word. After the registration, Darius Powell drove them back to the estate. During the journey, Aisha stared out the window, not truly seeing the passing scenery. She was now officially Mrs. Thorne. She suddenly realized she didn't even know her husband's full name before this moment. What is your first name? She asked, breaking the heavy silence. Elias Thorne gave a bitter smirk. Thorne is my surname. And now it's yours as well. It sounds ironic, doesn't it? Thorns are hardly a symbol of devotion and love. But for us, he didn't finish the sentence, but Aisha understood perfectly. They had a contract, a business arrangement, but certainly not love. That evening, Esther appeared in Aisha's room carrying a silver tray. Mr. Thorne asked me to inform you that dinner will be served in his private quarters, the housekeeper said, placing the tray on a small table. He expects you at 9 o'clock this evening. In his quarters? Aisha repeated, her heart suddenly beating faster. But we always dine in the dining room. Today is a special day. Esther avoided her gaze. The wedding, after all. When the housekeeper departed, Aisha sank onto the bed. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She knew this moment had to come eventually, but she felt completely unprepared. All day she had convinced herself that Elias was too sick, too frail for conjugal relations. But what if she was wrong? At 9 o'clock, gathering all her resolve, she descended to the ground floor. Elias Thorne's rooms were located in the east wing of the mansion, where she had never ventured before. The corridor was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls like phantoms. She knocked on the massive door. Come in, his voice called out. The room was unexpectedly modest compared to the rest of the house. A large bed with dark coverlet, several comfortable armchairs, built-in bookshelves, a crackling fireplace. A small table was set for an intimate dinner for two, candles, wine, exquisitely prepared dishes. Elias Thorne stood by the fireplace, still wearing his mask. He turned as he heard her footsteps. "Don't be afraid," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "I won't. I simply asked you to have dinner with me. Traditionally, a couple spends their first night together, but I understand that would be far too much to ask of you under these circumstances." Aisha felt a wave of relief wash over her, immediately replaced by shame at her own relief. She sat down at the table, avoiding his eyes. "I wanted to discuss the rules of our life together," Elias Thorne continued, taking a seat opposite her. "You are free to do whatever you want. Meet friends, travel wherever you wish. Money is at your complete disposal. I have absolutely no intention of controlling you or restricting your movements." "Then why all this?" Aisha blurted out. "If you don't need a real wife in any meaningful sense, why insist on marriage?" Elias Thorne poured wine into 2 crystal glasses. "I need company," he said simply. "Someone who will be here in this house. Someone I can talk to in the evening. Someone who will be near when the end comes." He fell silent, gazing into the dancing flames. You can't imagine how terrifying it is to face death completely alone, with no one who cares. There was such profound sorrow in his voice that Aisha felt an unexpected pang of genuine pity. "Tell me about yourself," she requested quietly. "Who are you really? Where did all the money come from? Why are you so utterly alone?" Elias Thorne remained silent for a long time, then sipped his wine slowly. "A long and sad story. I'm certain you don't want to hear it." "I do," Aisha insisted. "If we're husband and wife now, I should at least know who I'm living under the same roof with." Elias Thorne leaned back in his chair. His fingers clenched the glass tightly. The firelight cast strange, shifting shadows on his figure, making him look like a ghost from the past. "I was born into a poor family," he began slowly. "My father was an alcoholic. My mother worked 2 jobs simultaneously just to feed my younger brother and me. I understood from early childhood that if I wanted to achieve anything in this world, I'd have to fight my way up from the bottom. I studied relentlessly, went to college on scholarships, worked wherever I could find employment." He paused, lost in memory. "And then came the economic boom period. Chaos, opportunities, enormous risks. I took a risk, took out a substantial loan, started a small business. I got lucky. The business took off beyond my wildest expectations. Then another business and another. After 10 years, I was wealthy. After 20 years, I was very wealthy." "And were you alone all that time?" Aisha asked. "No." Bitterness entered his voice. "I was married. Celeste. She was beautiful, intelligent, sophisticated. I thought I loved her with all my heart. We married when I was 35. We had a daughter together." Aisha flinched visibly. "A daughter? So you did have a family. What happened?" she asked softly. "I was too busy with business." Elias Thorne stared into the fire without blinking. "Constant travel, endless meetings, high-stakes deals. I thought I was providing for them, giving them the very best life possible. But in reality, I was just absent from their lives." Celeste felt lonely and abandoned. And then she met another man, my former business partner, someone I had trusted completely. His voice grew harsh with old pain. "They carried on an affair behind my back for an entire year. When I finally discovered the truth, I caused a terrible scene. Celeste took our daughter and left with him, moved out completely." "And your daughter? How old was she?" 12. "Her name was Zoe." He clenched his fist tightly. "I tried desperately to fight for her, to maintain our relationship. But my wife systematically turned the child against me. She told Zoe I had abandoned them, that money was more important to me than my own family. Zoe stopped talking to me entirely, refused all contact. And then there was the accident. Aisha froze, sensing something terrible coming. Celeste and her new husband were driving together. Zoe was with them in the car. A drunk driver crossed into oncoming traffic at high speed. Elias Thorne fell silent, and Aisha saw his hand tremble violently. All three died instantly. Zoe was only 16 years old. "I am so sorry," Aisha whispered, and for the first time, her sympathy was absolutely genuine. "After that, I shut everyone out of my life," Elias Thorne continued. "I immersed myself in work even more obsessively than before. I built this estate, this mansion. I thought I would create some kind of family nest here where I could eventually bring my grandchildren someday, create new memories." He smiled bitterly. "Foolish, right? And then the stroke happened. The doctors said it was stress, chronic overwork, age catching up. I found myself chained to this trap of a body, half of which doesn't function anymore." Aisha looked at him and something fundamental shifted inside her. This wasn't just a rich old man who had purchased a young wife for companionship. This was a profoundly broken man who had lost absolutely everything that mattered. "That's why you wear the mask," she said quietly. "Not just because of the physical paralysis." Elias Thorne nodded slowly. "I don't want to see pity in people's eyes when they look at me. It's enough that I see it in the mirror every morning when I wake up." They sat in silence for a long time, broken only by the crackling of wood in the fireplace. Aisha pondered everything she had heard. Her own pain hadn't vanished, but now she understood that Elias was suffering too, perhaps even more deeply. "The room I chose," she said suddenly. Darius Powell started to say someone lived there before. Was it Zoe's room? Elias Thorne flinched as if physically struck. "Yes," he managed to say. "I furnished it completely, prepared it for my daughter's arrival, hoping desperately she would visit me someday. Forgive me. But she never came. After her death, I ordered the room closed and locked. No one entered it for almost 7 years. Should I choose another room?" Aisha offered. "No," he answered sharply. "On the contrary, let there be life in that room again. Let it not stand as an empty mausoleum to my failures." He stood laboriously, leaning heavily on his cane. "It's late. You should go rest." Aisha stood but lingered at the door. "Mr. Thorne, thank you for telling me all of this. I truly am sorry for your losses." "It's all in the past now," he waved her off, but she could see how tense his shoulders were, how much pain the conversation had caused. "Good night, Aisha." Aisha went up to her room and couldn't sleep for hours. Elias Thorne's tragic story haunted her thoughts. She imagined the young Zoe who lived within these walls only in her father's desperate dreams. The girl who never knew she had a loving home waiting for her return, a father who would have done anything to reconnect. In the morning, Aisha woke to the sound of rain. Gray drops drummed against the glass, turning the garden outside into a blurry watercolor painting. She dressed and went down to breakfast, but Elias was not at the table. "He's not feeling well this morning," Esther explained, pouring her coffee. "The doctor is with him now. He said Mr. Thorne should feel better by lunchtime." "Is it serious?" Aisha asked, surprised by the genuine concern in her own voice. "An exacerbation. It happens after stress or overexertion," the housekeeper shook her head. "Yesterday was emotionally hard for him. The wedding, talking extensively about the past." Aisha felt a sharp pang of guilt. "Can I visit him?" Esther raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Of course, you're his wife now. Just wait until the doctor finishes his examination." Aisha spent the morning in the library attempting to read, but her thoughts constantly returned to Elias, wondering how he was feeling. Around noon, Darius Powell appeared. "Mr. Thorne asks if you would come in, if you don't mind."